Welcome, everyone. I'm Valerie Renke with the Diocese of Olympia. Thank you for taking the time to join us for an online workshop on Texting God, the Spirituality of Youth with Sharon Ely Pearson. As you're aware, last month, Sharon would have been our keynote speaker and workshop leader at the annual Faith Formation mini-conference, Better Together. Even though that event was canceled because of concerns over the spread of COVID-19, Sharon has agreed to go ahead and record these for us, and we are forever grateful for that. A little bit about Sharon. She wears many hats, but you probably know her best as an author, blogger, educator, and faith formation cornerstone of the Episcopal Church. Recently retired as editor and Christian formation specialist with Church Publishing Incorporated, Sharon brings over 30 years of experience in Christian ed for children, youth, adults, and at the local diocesan and church-wide level. She's written and published numerous books, and you can follow her on her blog, roseofsharon.com. A couple of technical items today. We'll be recording the workshop. The plan is to edit it and archive it on the diocesan website, and I'll share out that link to you as soon as that happens. If you have a question while Sharon is running her slideshow, just hang on to it. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. If you'd rather just type it into chat, we'll get back to those chat questions at the end during that session. And then when you speak, just please introduce yourself and the church you are affiliated with. And now let's turn it over to Sharon, joining us today from her home in Connecticut. Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you, Valerie. And it's good to be back with all of you again. I feel like this has become a weekly thing that we get together, so which is kind of fun. So let's begin with prayer. The Lord be with you. Gracious God, we give you thanks for this day, this springtime, the sound of birds and lawnmowers, and all that you have given us in your world. Be with us as we talk about youth today and how we best serve their needs and help them grow in their relationship with you, God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. When I was sort of updating my presentation, knowing that life has changed a whole lot in our ministry with youth at this time, I was looking at what the difference between childhood and youth are, especially since right now, for all of us, our children and youth are at home together in our homes, being schooled or trying to learn and things like that. And so I figured, well, we've got lots of generations now in our homes trying to do all of these things. And in some ways, it's working real well. In other ways, it's getting a little tiresome and a little difficulty. But so I looked at what the United Nations says about what is a child, what is youth, and what really struck me is their definition of a childhood, which really goes from 0 to in their 20s, even depending on where you are in the world. So they say childhood is the time for children to be in school and at play, to grow strong and confident with the love and encouragement of their family and an extended community of caring adults. It is a precious time in which children should live free from fear, safe from violence, and protected from abuse and exploitation. As such, childhood means much more than just the space between birth and the attainment of adulthood. It refers to the state and condition of a child's life, to the quality of those years. When I read that definition, I was thinking, gosh, where are children and this generation of children now who are kind of called Generation Alpha, or certainly Generation Z, young people? What is this period of time in their lives is going to be the momentous time, and hopefully nothing else after this will be that sort of is that point of reference that will always affect them, and how this may affect them developmentally in a lot of ways as far as trust and feeling safe and things like that. So not necessarily starting on a positive point, but I think it shows how important we are as leaders of faith with our young people in supporting them and providing spaces wherever they are that provide safety and trust and things like that. So let's focus on adolescence, which is a fairly new phenomena in culture, really, because it didn't exist until recent times. Really, after the Industrial Revolution, that adolescence was being looked at. So I've got some definitions of what an adolescent is. We can think of it between the ages of 10 to 11 through 18. So middle school, high school, some college age. And Mary Piper, who was an author who wrote some really great books a number of years ago, especially on adolescence. She has said that adolescence is a border between adulthood and childhood, and as such, it has a richness and a diversity unmatched by any other stage. With adolescence, many kinds of development occur, and we see this if we're working with youth for sure. There's the physical, the emotional, the intellectual, the academic, the social, and the spiritual. And they don't always occur in tandem. And with youth, if you put a whole bunch together in a room, they're all going to be at different places in all of those different areas at the same time. Puberty is defined as the biological process, while adolescence is defined as the social and personal experiences of that process. So let's look at this huge category of adolescence, at least in today's age. It used to be we'd say adolescents are teenagers, but we know now that there's different stages within that adolescent span of years. We can think of young adolescents or pre-adolescents. The tweens, which is even a new label, tend to be between 10 and 12 years old. They may still be in elementary school, fifth grade, sixth grade, depending on when that break is. So that in that early adolescence would be from 12 to 14. So definitely the middle school years. At that period of time with them, they are, it's a lot of physical changes going on. And they're changing from concrete to abstract thinking. So oftentimes in lots of congregations, this is when young people are confirmed. So which is a tough time because they're also in a they're getting to be a searching phase and trying to figure out what's really going on and is this real? What do I really believe? Because as they move from concrete to abstract thinking, they're beginning to, in science and in math, really look at problems and solutions, cause and effect. And often when we think about faith, we can't explain it in those same terms. So if we read in scripture, perfect example is when we look at the creation stories and how literal and sequential they are in a short period of time. If we read them that way, it goes totally against what science would say about evolution and the creation of the cosmos. So how do we help young people sort of walk between those lines and realize that how the scripture is written, who the audience was for, and that a day in God's time is totally different. So Chronos and Kairos are totally different things, and who cares how long it really happened? Something happened, and God, a greater power, did that creation. Who did the Big Bang? It didn't just come. There was something that we believe as people of faith that made that happen. And then middle adolescence, there's a lot more identity development going on. One develops a personal moral code, and hopefully faith definitely informs that regarding one's ethics and moral behavior and trying to unpack what they believe in faith. Erik Erikson, who's one of the developmentalists that really looks more academic and psychosocial, he feels that during these times for boys, because a lot of his research was done on boys, there were always two tensions involved during this adolescent period. So it was identity or role confusion. Who am I? So that's where the questions come up. Who am I? What do I want to be when I grow up? What do people say I need to be when I grow up? And there's the intimacy versus isolation piece that they are also managing to go both before, balancing between wanting to be by oneself or wanting to be socially surrounded by peers. A lot of this, like I mentioned, Erickson looked at boys, and they developed a little bit differently than Carol Gilligan, who looked at girls' development. And she felt a lot of that with girls always developed simultaneously, because girls being a little more social in their interactions with others than boys at the time of both of their research. Robert Keegan is a more recent developmentalist, and he feels that the whole point of adolescence and beyond, so into adulthood, which become lifelong tasks, are those of integrating and separating what we believe from what we don't believe, from what others believe and what we believe. So trying to figure all of that stuff out. And I think faith definitely fits into those categories. The searching part and that establishment of identity, I think, is a key component in adolescence. And those of us who minister with youth can really help in helping them develop those in whole ways, by developing trust, by being good mentors and modeling what a faithful person is, how they act. Adolescents see the hypocrisy in things really easily, and they know when folks are faking it. I think back to my son, who I guess when he was 15 or 16, said to me, "What is this about all these people who come to church? Everybody acts so nice and kind when we're in worship or when we're hanging out in the building, but the minute we go back outside, I can hear them yelling at their kids in the parking lot and totally acting the other way." So young people recognize that and call adults to task for that. So during these times, this is when we see kids wanting to be in their rooms. There's that cross between leave me alone, I'm going to hole up in my room, or those that just want to be with friends and being very social. I think today, this is really, our times today for youth is really difficult because they can't be with their friends. And before we actually started all of this, some of us were talking about, how there have been Zoom calls and things with young people for youth groups. And in some cases that's working really well because they get to see each other's faces. But in some cases, they're just done with this. They want to get things back to normal. They're tired and they feel robbed of a lot of their, especially if they're seniors in high school, that there's a lot of lamenting going on and sorrow and anger, which are all part of a grief process that our young people are going through just as much as we as adults are. Another developmentalist named Charles Shelton, he felt that change of identity involves a lot of different things as part of an adolescent's formation of their own self. So think about those who are younger adolescents, those tweens, those middle schoolers. They are fairly fragile in their identity. They're easily swayed by peers or others, and they're not as confident in standing up for what they believe on their own. And so peers sometimes fill that gap. If they're not quite sure, they'll go along with their peers say. They also will follow along with what their parents say in many instances, or they'll push back to that. But as time progresses through all of that, they develop more autonomy. They have stronger friendships and relationships that often last into adulthood. I think part of our role in being mentors and leaders with youth are helping them in developing all of these things that will will give them a strong identity of who they are, knowing that everyone is going to be different. But helping them, I think oftentimes if we're mentoring them in confirmation, that I believe is one of the roles that confirmation can really accomplish with young people, is helping them figure out who they are, what they believe, knowing that it's still going to change, it's lifelong, but being able to make up their own decision for their own mind in relationship with what the gospel says we are to be as Christians, using our baptismal covenant to help figure out what those boundaries are and things like that. There are 4 basic identity phases that and I put a URL at the bottom of this, that psychologist James Marcia has developed, that really makes sense to me, that we see young people go through. The first one is called diffusion, and he would define that as, I don't know, I don't care. I think some of us have probably heard young people say that, leave me alone, I don't care. And they may not have experienced an identity crisis yet. So they don't care, just leave them alone. They're not sure what they believe. Key issues such as religion, politics, oftentimes gender roles, if it hasn't already occurred, occupation, some of those things they're not really thinking about at all at that point. So that's an early part of that identity development. And then they move on to foreclosure. And this is when they start to really develop their own opinions and about their identity and about others, judging others. And sometimes that's cultivated from what others might say about them. They're starting to have stable commitments to people and friends that are becoming lifelong friends. But they still they're still exploring, and they haven't come to a crisis of all of a sudden realizing what they had believed in before doesn't make any sense. So, for example, these might be young people when they, probably before the age of voting, but it might include the time when they can vote. They tend to do what their parents believe at that time. Even though they might be arguing with their parents anymore all the time, they might still have the same political, religious thoughts as their parents do, those who are closest to them. And that's going to come up against their peers who come from different backgrounds at that time. So they're not starting to question those beliefs yet, but they're definitely coming. And that's the phase called moratorium, in which they'll have challenges that they've inherited. So things that they've inherited from parents, people they've been around with for a long time, suddenly may not make so much sense to them anymore because they're hearing things from the outside world, and they're realizing that there are other voices that they're hearing perhaps for the first time. They may be totally disregarding those other voices, or they may be listening very careful to what they are. So this is when they start expressing their doubts, their uncertainties about what they believe. This is the time where lots of young people will say, I don't believe in God, and I don't think there is a God, or who's Buddha? I'm gonna explore and look at other types of faith, or kind of blend lots of them together. This is where lots of the phrase of a Kenda Creasy Dean and in the whole almost Christian those texts that have that moral therapeutic deism means that God wants everybody to be happy, so I just need to be a really good person, without going really deeper into that. And then the last one is the one that I think we wish and we hope for the youth that we work with, that they become their own individual, in which they explore who they are constantly. It's an ongoing process, and they are constantly exploring what they believe in, but they begin to develop their own statement or their own commitment to what they believe, what their values are, and what their moral standards are. So their identity is then defined by all of the perspectives that have come before them. So I, think you've probably got kids in all of these areas all together in your youth group. If you've got middle school and high school kids together, definitely. And some middle schoolers are pretty far along developed, and some high schoolers are not. Everyone is really an individual, and we can't just plug people into these. But it's important to kind of think about, where are your youth and what phases do you think they are in? So part of it is like, who is the adult in all of this? And who are the adults that are our role models for these kinds of things? There's a saying that went out right after the financial crisis in the mid 2000s, 2008. And they were saying there were no adults in the room when all that happened. There were no checks and balances. No one was paying attention to what was going on for that. Dan Heischman is another good person. He's the executive director of the National Association of Episcopal Schools. And he's written a book called Good Influence, which is really helpful, I find, in that talking about what are the roles of parents. As a parent, how can you kind of step up? Because in today's world, or at least when he wrote the book, there were helicopter parents. I'm sure many of you know them, of parents of youth that you work with. Or now there are folks, people are sometimes calling them bulldozing parents that just come in and take care of it all. So the helicopter ones are those who hover a lot. They need to constantly be in touch with their teen. And what this does is it produces fusion with the parent and the teen instead of instilling their influence on their teen. They become the voice piece for their youth, when youth should really be figuring that out for themselves. I think a lot of this has come post 9/11 because of that. Parents are more fearful of their kids, and it will be interesting to see what happens after this period of time. Dan Heischman also talks about the presence of an adult, how important that is, that we adults stand in the midst of chaos and uncertainty with confidence. At least, certainly share how we're feeling, that, yeah, we're scared too. We're also uncertain, but we are going to be consistent, and we are still going to be present no matter what. So remaining calm and centered and unshaken is a really important role for adults at all times with young people, but especially in times like this. Another role for adults is to sit with a problem with them, not try to solve their problem, which is really hard to do because we want to make them feel better, or we want to have a good solution for them when they're struggling. But our role as adults are to be listeners and explorers, help them filter through and see pros and cons, and to sometimes ask probing questions to see what's really going on. Why is this behavior happening? Why are you asking these questions? What's really going on? And to help them discover what their inner voice is. And sometimes that's the tone of voice that we use with them. But for us to remain with integrity, and to be the adult in the room and not to be their friend, because they have lots of friends. They need adults who are adults. Moving really into what today is, we can be considered that we are living in an age of condensation, in which there is so much overpowering us, and certainly with young people. Young people aren't on Facebook. That's sort of that's where all my parents are on. So young people are not on that. And it was interesting. I just, did this research, and this is from, I guess, 2018. So it's fairly recent, that the percentage of US teens use YouTube, Instagram, and Snapchat for theirs. And certainly texting, which isn't a social media platform, but texting is definitely more a form of communication. Picking up a phone and making a phone call. I mean, the phone is not for making phone calls. The phone is for texting or looking at social media. So there's definitely generational pieces along with this. And so how do we use these in our ministry too with young people if we want to reach them where they are? And how do we help them use this in socially appropriate ways and protective ways? So knowing that if you put something out there, you're leaving a footprint. So when someone's going to look at you to hire you for a job, whether, and this could be in high school, so certainly not in the professional sector, which they certainly do. People look at that. But for college, for joining an organization, for any of those things, and to figure out, how to protect themselves also for those things. One of the interesting statistics that I read is how many youth during this time of being locked up or, in lockdown, which is, a horrible word to say because it's so associated with gun violence, that there's more young people are going to pornography sites, a whole lot more than they ever were before. So how do we help inform young people in their use of all of the world that's at their fingertips in healthy ways? I think we can be real guidance, give guidance for those kinds of things. The young people with us today are digital pilgrims, and they're digital natives too. They were born with all of this, but they see the world and they're traveling through the world in digital ways. So looking at the generations that we have in our churches right now are Generation Z. So those are, as far as young people are concerned, those were born after 1996. So in the general population, 45% of them never or rarely attend church at all. And 34% have no religion at all. And then Generation Alpha, which are coming after them. So those are those that are in elementary school right now with us. And maybe some, I didn't do the math. But for them, knowledge is acquired by doing and experience things. I think that has a lot to teach us about how we work with them. So certainly my generation I'm a baby boomer, was learning through being the teacher, teach to my brain, which had no information in it, that they thought it was important that I learn a lot of facts, a lot of information for then to make decisions or learn things. Whereas Gen Z and Gen Alpha, it's got to be by doing. They're acquiring things. There was a post I recently found from christianpost.com, which is not always a relevant site. However, I did find an interesting article written by someone who was involved with young people in summer camps and things like that. And what he felt that he learned in working with Gen Z, so these are those born after 1996 and perhaps moving into Alpha, although there haven't been a whole lot of studies about children yet because it's too soon, is that they want more out of church than potluck dinners. They want to be part of doing something in a church. They want to be active. They don't want to just sit in a pew. They want to preach if they're invited to. They want to have a say. They want to participate fully. And they're more afraid and more fearful of death than other generations because of what has gone around them. So there is that fear about, I'm going to live for today because of what they've seen around them. They're not impressed by how big a church is or how small a church is or what the budget is of a church. They're interested in what's going on outside the church's walls, what's being done in the community. They want to be mobilized. So why can't we mobilize them? They're not ageist. They don't think of themselves, although they do tend to like to be with their peers and socialize, but they're desperate for being with others, for older generations to teach them. It may not be their parents' generation, but their grandparents' generation they really look to. They want to know about those. And there's a lot of young people who are of a fatherless generation, whose fathers are not as active in their lives. They seek discipleship and mentorship. And I think that's what the church can really give to this generation. They may ask you to hang out or use other words for that. And sometimes we need to figure out what their language and vocabulary is. I'm learning, my kids are not Gen Z, they're millennials, but the language they use is totally different. So I ask them to help interpret for me, oftentimes, what they mean by certain terms. But Gen Z also values the why over the what. It's not what we're doing, it's why are we doing it? And so those are the questions they come up with church and faith is, well, why do you believe that? Why are we doing this? Why does it have to be done this way? So young people are not necessarily going to follow their faith of their parents or their grandparents because they're asking why, and they need honest answers to their questions. And you've probably heard this one also. They don't want to be seen as the future of the church. They want to be seen as the church of now. They are, and they are. They're not the future. They are the now. They want ownership of ministry. So the church needs to kind of give it to them, which means giving up power, which is a hard thing for adults to do. But that's how we can mentor them and allow them to take on roles of leadership and accept their ideas that they may have. And if they fail, that's okay. We can still support them in doing that. But if we're walking alongside them, that's really helpful. They want authenticity and transparency. Young people know when people are trying to put something over on them. They know what reality is. They've lived through some pretty hard reality financially, so economically, and certainly with world events and politically. And after, the COVID-19 and living under these kinds of conditions, that's certainly going to have an effect on them. So they have known brokenness in an age earlier more than probably other generations, even those that went to war in World War I and World War II. These two generations of children have known a lot of brokenness in a variety of ways, by gun violence, by graphic images and evil that they've been exposed to much earlier in their lives than previous generations have. So we can support them in that, and we can be that stable presence. But they are also looking for solutions for things. So they are the ones that are being extremely creative and thinking about how to solve some of the issues that are going on. And we need to pay attention and listen to them, what they have to say. Oops. So what about spirituality with youth? What can we do? How can we help them and support them in that? And if we think of spirituality as being that innate longing for a connection with God, because young people have that. So how can we help them connect with God? And it might not be coming to church and worshiping on Sunday. So how can we help do that? Like I said previously, we can give them control. We can help them find meaning in rituals and services. We can engage them and challenge them. We need to let them take the lead and not underestimate their capabilities, even though while they're still trying to figure out who they are and what they want to do and what they believe, this is how they're going to find out, by being able to lead an experiment. And our role is to kind of be with them along the way for that. So there are specific things I think that we can do, is certainly teach them how to pray, and not necessarily that you need to have a prayer book in front of you to do that. And there's lots of ways that we can teach prayer. Young people love just silence because they don't get it anywhere else. So walking a labyrinth, using centering prayer, listening to music, and coloring mandalas, things that often have tactile things to do them, that experiential doing things, forms of prayer, making prayer beads, all of those kinds of things that help us keep Sabbath. Young people, children, they don't get Sabbath anymore. And I think probably a lot of that is the struggle that's going on with folks at home in homeschooling, is because mom and dad are trying to work and the kids are supposed to work, and home in more recent times hasn't been structured that way. So when do we all take a break and just go out, throw a ball around, sleep? Young people need sleep, and those things. Using candles, music, relaxing, do flashlight prayers with them, share pictures of family, whatever configuration that might be, and so use visual things that you can do with kids. One of the things that a woman wrote, Elizabeth Caldwell, if I can find my sheet. Yeah, she wrote a great book called Leaving Home with Faith. Her name's Elizabeth Caldwell, and there's a book that she called At Home with Faith, which is for parents to do with their children. But in her book, Leaving Home with Faith, is another great book that talks about what do we give kids as they go. And she calls that her backpack of belonging. So she says, what are we trying to give them? We want to fill them with values, with good memories, with nuts and bolts of what you need to take along with you on this journey of life. So she says important things that we give them are memories, good memories, memories of family time, memories of time at church, memories of worship. We need to give them what she calls watermarks and promises. These might be sacramental pieces, so pieces that have to do with water, their confirmation, baptism, other life milestones kind of pieces, graduations. And as a little side note, I recently posted a whole list of resources for doing laments and thanksgivings with young people in this period of time. And that was put together by a whole consortium of folks, of a curated list of liturgies that we could do for those who are graduating, without the graduation, and other things, but how we also help them come to grips with it. So what spiritual habits and practices can we teach them now that will be in their backpack? She says, what is the bread and juice? She's a UCC person. What's the bread and the juice that we can give them to help them remember what the symbols are of life, of justice, of creation, of salvation, all our core belief systems of who we are as Episcopalians and as Christians? What are some symbols that we can give them to put in their backpack? And then what experiences can we give them? Retreats, mission trips, pilgrimages, those things that are part of then their history and their memories for building on. I'm going to stop talking. I'm looking at the clock. Questions. And there's a chart up here. I just discovered this, which I thought was cool. I'm not going to go through it, but part of it is seeing the differences of generations and what each of them have. So for me as a baby boomer, my musical device was an audio cassette. It was also an LP or a 45, whereas today's might be a smart speaker. We had Frisbees, although Frisbees are still used throughout generations. Fidget spinners are now what the alpha generation has for those. So anyway, questions. This graphic is maybe more distracting than anything else.
It's fascinating. We can just open it up, and if you have a question, just unmute yourself and just introduce yourself with name and church affiliation.
I gave you a lot of information. There's got to be something that you want to push back on.
Okay, I've got a question, Sharon.
Yeah.
About the order, the basic identity phases. Do those typically, those phases go in that chronological order?
According to the psychologist who developed those, yes.
Okay, so for good healthy identity, that would be, you'd go through those. And I think you mentioned that it's at different ages for different kids.
Sure. But I think, the person, and I don't remember what his name was on this one, those were the stages that one would go. So you needed to experience one before the other. In a positive developmental way. So, there could probably be people that would skip things, just like some kids skip crawling, they just walk. And some developmentalists would say, no, there's a purpose to crawling. Some children need to learn how to crawl. And some would disagree with that.
Suzanne from Aberdeen, St. Andrew. Sue, Tate, do you have that book, Elizabeth Caldwell's books in the library?
Suzanne, I think so. I made a note, and I don't want to mess up this screen by going to our catalog, but I'm pretty sure we do. So send me a note, and as soon as we can send books out, I'll send them to you. We have a lot on Sharon's bibliography.
I know you do. Thank you very much.
And both those titles have been out for a while. And they're great because both of them also have a whole section in the back for discussions. So if you wanted to have a parent group come together and read the book and then talk about it, there's lots of ideas for that. And some of them are actually experiential kinds of stuff that I've done with youth in them.
Question. You mentioned, Sharon, that, by the way, I'm Beth Cahape from Port Townsend, St. Paul's. You mentioned that we should use YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat more in our ministry, or you asked how we could use these in our ministry. Talk a little more about that.
Well, certainly YouTube, I think, is a little bit more accessible. I don't do Snapchat, so I really can't speak to that. But, I think we need to be present where they are present. YouTube, young people look at YouTube all of the time, and memes and all of that stuff. So what if we engage them in creating YouTube videos? They know how to do it, on faith, on creating, what their thoughts are about scripture, or reenacting a Bible story, or doing prayer, setting up a prayer station or just a meditation and putting that up on YouTube. They'll all look at each other's stuff for sure. One of my confirmation class, there's a couple girls that when they come in, they come together and they're all looking at their phones at the same time, and they're sharing basic YouTubes of crazy antic stuff with each other. So what if we help them create other stuff? Instagram for sure, taking prayers, turning them into memes and all of that kind of stuff. that make sense? Means we also have to learn how to do it too, or have them show us how to do it. Have them give us a tutorial.
There's a question from the chat from Denise Brumbaugh, our recently retired youth ministry coordinator. And she's just requesting that you speak a little bit more about the roles of parents and church in developing spirituality.
Statistics from a variety of sources have said that young people will continue to have a life of faith if their parents do. So parents, and it is shown that when parents are actively engaged in faith at church and faith at home, that their children and teens will also. Those teens who drop off after confirmation or graduation from high school, etc., like that, are more likely to drop off because their parents do also. That their parents bring them to church to be educated, to learn faith, but do not practice it on their own. And sharing those kinds of statistics and information with parents, I think is really helpful. Sometimes it doesn't sink in, but parents want the best for their kids, no matter what it may seem sometimes, that they want them to be faithful. Otherwise, they wouldn't even bother at all, who do show up. So it is an opportunity for when kids, for example, suddenly show up to be confirmed, that we haven't seen in a while. It's an opportunity for us to engage parents also in that. And sometimes that's hard because parents just have co-opted or let the church co-opt them in that, and have easily handed over those responsibilities of faith formation to the church. Anybody else have other points to share on that?
We can mull over that one, but also just wondering, are there practices that you've seen, Sharon, since you travel far and wide, practices that we've traditionally used with youth that just need to die or fall up by the wayside? Is there anything?
Yeah, for sure, is often in churches, youth are asked to set up and clean up after events. That's not fair. They're not, cheap labor. Everybody needs to do that together. I think the assumption that they want to hang out and have pizza is not necessarily always true. When we were searching for a new Christian ed person in my parish, we interviewed kids to ask them what they were looking for and what they felt the program was missing, that they hoped someone would bring, and they said prayer. And those of us who were talking with them almost fell off our chairs because we were really surprised that they asked for that, because we thought that they had already been doing that a little bit, but they wanted more. They wanted more time to do things. They liked doing mission trips and service in their local community. A few hours of a kind of thing, making sandwiches and then delivering them to homeless in the park. They really liked doing those kinds of things. They didn't like sitting around being lectured to. I think we all know that. And they wanted to pray. They wanted to spend more time in quiet, in prayer. That to me, that was a big surprise. There's a real hunger for that. They're not getting anywhere else.
And one last question here from Denise. She's requesting any suggestions for resources to help equip parents for their role.
I think I can think of a number of websites that are helpful, more family oriented, that not necessarily youth oriented, but Grow Christians is a blog that Forward Movement puts out that shares a lot of great ideas for families to do together. So all, generations. Fuller Youth Institute has a lot of really helpful articles for youth leaders, but for parents also. And another one is the Yale Institute for Youth Ministry, I think it's called, They also have they have webinars free now. They have a monthly, and they've got really good speakers with that. I think there are some books on parenting, having parent groups just to talk about these things, and sharing with them what developmental stages are with parents, so they understand that their kid is perfectly normal, and that they're living with a person who's going through the developmental stuff that they need to be, and that if their child says, I don't believe in God, that's appropriate sometimes for kids, that they're trying to figure out their lives. And it's, I believe, just like all of us, we learn when we question and have to search for an answer more than just being told things. So those are 3 resources I think of. And Vibrant Faith, or John Roberto's Lifelong Faith Associates, I think he's got a number of, he used to put out a journal regularly, and there is one for parents. There's one that talks about parents a lot, and a variety of generations. So that's all of that stuff is really helpful information. A lot of statistics sometimes, but helpful tools that he has.
And I'm looking at your handout, which is so robust and beautiful, and you have many suggestions there too, in addition to those. So thank you for that awesome handout.
I was going to refer to some of that and I forgot. So, but yeah, there's hopefully some of that's repeated in addition to what I've already said. But
okay, well, great. We'll wrap it up with that. Sharon, as usual, thank you so much. I think you're done with this 3-part series.
I don't get to see you all next week.
Really appreciate it. And thanks all of you for coming out and watching one more Zoom meeting. I'm delighted that Sharon is gets to be here to instruct us and guide us. And it's just great to have all of you along for the ride too. So thank you. And we'll continue to stay connected.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much.
Great being with all of you.